Right now, as you are watching this, the Weather Prediction Center has 3 separate flash flood risk areas drawn across the eastern United States at the same time. One over the northern Mid-Atlantic and New England, one along the Carolina coast, one over the Gulf Coast of Florida, and none of those 3 is the reason forecasters are worried. Because 2 weeks ago, on the 29th of July, parts of eastern New York recorded more than 11 inches of rain. Roads went under across the capital region and the Hudson Valley. Cars were trapped on Central Avenue in Albany, and the water drained away, and the cameras left, and almost everybody moved on. The ground did not. What is setting up over the eastern United States for the next 10 days is not one storm. It is a pattern, a reconfiguration of the atmosphere that will fire repeated rounds of slow-moving thunderstorms across the same states day after day, while a ridge of high pressure off the coast pumps tropical moisture northward out of the Gulf and the Atlantic. Rain rates of 2 inches an hour, storms that stall and train over the same towns, and underneath all of it, soil that has already taken everything it can hold. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. The thing that kills people in a setup like this is not the storm. It is smaller than a storm, it is closer than the coast, and it is measured in inches, not miles per hour. By the time we are done here, you will know exactly what it is. Today we are going to break down exactly what is going on, where it is most dangerous, and whether things could get even worse. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever driven into water on a road that looked shallower than it was? Tell me where you were and what happened. And if you want to be the first to know every time something major happens, subscribe. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Now, let us get into it. To understand what the next 10 days look like, you have to start with what the last 2 weeks already did. On the 29th of July, a slow-moving system stalled over eastern New York. In parts of Rensselaer and Columbia counties, rainfall totals exceeded 11 inches. To put 11 inches in context, that is roughly 3 months of normal summer rainfall delivered in a matter of hours. Flooding was reported across the capital region and the Hudson Valley. On Central Avenue in Albany, near the Colony town line, floodwater rose high enough to trap vehicles on a major urban road. That event was covered for about a day and a half. Then the water receded, and it disappeared from the news cycle. A week later, the pattern started again. On the 6th of August, scattered storms moved through the Northeast. Attention shifted quickly to Friday the 7th, when stronger thunderstorms were forecast to move across one of the most heavily populated corridors in the country, from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, up through Philadelphia, and into New York City. The Weather Prediction Center placed parts of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast under a marginal risk of excessive rainfall. Forecasters warned of damaging wind gusts of 55 to 65 miles per hour, torrential rain, frequent lightning, and localized flash flooding. A plume of deep atmospheric moisture stretched from the Ohio Valley all the way into New England. And the warning that came with it contained a phrase that matters more than anything else in this video. Storms that move slowly or repeatedly cross the same communities could overwhelm storm drains and cause flooding in low-lying, urban, and poor drainage areas. Repeatedly cross the same communities. Hold on to that. By the following Thursday, NOAA's Weather Prediction Center had issued a broad level 1 out of 4 risk of flash flooding covering much of the Ohio Valley and the interior Northeast, including Cleveland, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and New York. NOAA's Storm Prediction Center simultaneously issued a level 1 out of 5 risk of severe thunderstorms across a corridor from the Mid-Atlantic into the interior Northeast, including Washington, D.C., Scranton, Syracuse, and Albany. Damaging wind gusts were listed as the primary threat. That changed fast. A cold front that had already dumped heavy rain across the Midwest was shifting east. Ahead of it, afternoon thunderstorms were developing daily across the Northeast, and an area of high pressure sitting off the East Coast was drawing tropical moisture northward out of the Gulf and the Atlantic, creating conditions forecasters described as very muggy, which is a mild word for an atmosphere loaded to capacity with water. Through that weekend, forecasters projected rainfall totals of half an inch to an inch across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, with localized amounts exceeding 1 to 2 inches where thunderstorms repeatedly moved over the same locations, which brings us to right now. As of this weekend, the Weather Prediction Center's short-range discussion identifies 3 slight risk areas, level 2 out of 4, for excessive rainfall across the eastern United States. 1 over parts of the northern Mid-Atlantic and New England, 1 along the North and South Carolina coast, 1 over the Gulf Coast of Florida. The associated heavy rain is expected to create localized flash flooding, with urban areas, roads, small streams, and low-lying areas listed as the most vulnerable. And the extended discussion, issued from College Park, Maryland, describes a multi-day heavy rainfall threat extending from parts of the Midwest into the Ohio Valley, alongside hazardous heat forecast across much of the south central and southeast United States through the following weekend. That combination, flooding in the north, dangerous heat in the south, both at once, both persisting, is the 10-day picture. And forecasters are describing the large-scale pattern as reasonably well established, with good agreement among the models on the persistence of an active northern tier flow and ridging over the south-central United States. In plain language, this is not a one-day event that will pass. The atmosphere has locked into a shape, and it intends to hold it. So what actually changed? Why is the East Coast suddenly the target? The answer is the jet stream, and it is worth understanding properly. The jet stream is a river of fast-moving air roughly 6 to 9 miles above the ground, marking the boundary between cold polar air to the north and warm tropical air to the south. It does not run in a straight line. It buckles into ridges and troughs, northward bulges of warm air, and southward dips of cool air. Where the jet stream sits and how sharply it buckles determines almost everything about surface weather beneath it. Over the past 2 weeks, that pattern reorganized. A broad trough, a southward dip, settled over the eastern United States, while a ridge of high pressure built over the south-central states. Forecasters describe a series of shortwave energies ejecting eastward into that eastern troughing, each one dragging a slow-moving frontal boundary across the Rockies and Plains, into the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, and on across the Northeast. Each of those shortwaves is a trigger, and the fuel they are triggering is the second half of the story. Sitting off the East Coast is an area of high pressure circulating clockwise, and that clockwise circulation acts like a pump. It draws air northward along the eastern seaboard directly out of the Gulf of Mexico and the subtropical Atlantic, air that has spent weeks sitting over water in the middle of summer, saturated with evaporated moisture. Meteorologists measure this with a value called precipitable water, the total depth of water you would get if you condensed an entire column of the atmosphere into liquid. Across the eastern United States in this pattern, precipitable water values have been running in the range of 1.5 to 1 3/4 inches and higher. To put that in context, values above 1.5 inches in the Northeast are near the upper limit of what that atmosphere normally carries. The air is effectively full. When a slow-moving front triggers a thunderstorm inside air that loaded, the storm does not produce ordinary rain. Forecasters have measured hourly rainfall rates in this pattern between 1 and 2 inches per hour, with local amounts up to 2.5 inches per hour possible, and then comes the mechanism that turns heavy rain into a disaster. It is called training. Picture thunderstorms as rail cars moving along a track. When the steering winds aloft run parallel to the front that is generating the storms, each new storm forms at the same point and travels the same path as the one before it, like rail cars passing over the same section of track, one after another. A single thunderstorm dropping 2 inches an hour over a town for 20 minutes is a nuisance. 6 thunderstorms doing it in succession over 3 hours is 6 inches of rain on one community while the town 20 miles away stays dry. That is the setup forecasters have been warning about. Slow-moving storms repeatedly crossing the same communities inside an atmosphere carrying near-record moisture. But here's the factor that makes this specific 10-day window more dangerous than the raw numbers suggest, and it is the thing I told you about at the start. The ground. Soil absorbs water at a finite rate. When it is dry, it can take a remarkable amount. Rainfall soaks in, infiltrates downward, and only the excess runs off. But saturated soil behaves like pavement. Once the pore spaces between soil particles are already full of water, additional rainfall does not infiltrate at all. It runs off immediately at nearly 100% straight into creeks, culverts, storm drains, and streets. Parts of eastern New York took 11 inches on the 29th of July. The Midwest and Ohio Valley have been taking repeated rounds since. Across large stretches of the region now under these risk areas, the soil is already at or near saturation, which means that the 2 inches of rain that would have been absorbed in June will, over the next 10 days, arrive on the surface as 2 inches of runoff. This is why a level 1 or level 2 flash flood risk in mid-August over the Northeast is not the same hazard as the identical risk level in early June. The number on the map is the same, the ground underneath it is not. These are not just meteorological events. They are human experiences. And the difference between the ones that end in inconvenience and the ones that end in funerals comes down to a distinction almost nobody makes. Think about what happened in Albany. 11 inches of rain fell across 2 counties. That is a genuinely extreme event. The kind of rainfall that would make national news if it landed on a coastline attached to a named hurricane. It did not. It landed on inland New York in July, attached to nothing with a name, and it received roughly a day of coverage. Now consider how those same 2 counties would have responded if the identical 11 inches had arrived under the words hurricane warning. There would have been days of advance notice on every channel in the state. There would have been emergency declarations, staged equipment, pre-positioned rescue crews, and a public that had already moved cars to higher ground. The rain would have been the same. The response would have been completely different. This is the gap that kills people in the eastern United States, and it is widening rather than closing. Coastal residents from Florida to the Carolinas have been trained by decades of hurricane seasons to respect a forecast. They know what an evacuation zone is. They know what a cone means. Inland residents in the Ohio Valley, in interior Pennsylvania, in upstate New York, in the Appalachian valleys receive the same rainfall totals from unnamed systems and have never been given a reason to think of themselves as living in disaster country. The difference between surviving a flash flood and not surviving one is not luck. It is whether the person knew that 6 inches of moving water is enough to knock an adult off their feet, and whether they knew it before they stepped into it. And there is one more layer to this pattern that deserves attention, because it separates the northern half of the East Coast from the southern half. While the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast face repeated flooding, the Southeast and Southern plains sit under the ridge and under hazardous heat forecast to persist through the coming weekend. Heat and flooding are usually discussed as opposite problems. In this pattern, they're the same problem, viewed from two sides of the same jet stream buckle. The ridge that bakes Georgia and Alabama is the same feature that anchors the trough dumping rain on Pennsylvania and New York. If you follow extreme weather news at all, that combination probably already rings a bell. It is the signature of a strongly amplified jet stream, a pattern that does not move on quickly because the ridge and the trough hold each other in place. So what happens next, and what should you actually be watching? The first thing is the tropics, and this is the wild card nobody is discussing enough. AccuWeather's hurricane team has been monitoring the Atlantic and Northern Caribbean for potential tropical development in the window from the 9th through the 15th of August. Weak tropical disturbances have, in similar patterns, drifted into the southeast from that direction. And here's why that matters, even though this hurricane season has been historically quiet. These systems usually produce very little wind, they rarely earn a name, they almost never make headlines. But when one of them moves into an already saturated pattern, it dramatically increases rainfall totals and significantly raises the risk of flash flooding. A disorganized tropical blob with no name and no category arriving over ground that cannot absorb another inch is a substantially more dangerous object than most people would ever guess. The second thing to watch is the trough itself. Model guidance has been pointing toward a deep trough developing over the eastern United States during the second week of August, with air of Arctic origin spilling southward, and temperatures in some locations running roughly 10 to 20 degrees below seasonal averages. The coolest stretch has been projected between the 12th and the 20th. Forecasters have been clear that guidance this far out is subject to change, but the reason that matters is not the temperature, it is the collision. Cool air advancing into warm, extremely humid air is what sharpens frontal boundaries, and sharp boundaries are what generate the strongest and slowest moving thunderstorms. Repeated rounds of heavy rain and thunderstorms have been projected across the deep south, the southeast, the mid-Atlantic, and portions of the east coast, with abundant tropical moisture lingering along the coast, while cooler air pushes in behind it. Keep an eye on the soil moisture maps, too. They are published, they are free, and they are the single most underrated forecast product available to the public. A level 2 flash flood risk over saturated ground deserves more of your attention than a level 3 over dry ground. And keep an eye on the heat in the southeast, because heat kills more Americans in an average year than floods, hurricanes, and tornadoes combined, and it does it quietly, in homes without air conditioning, without a single dramatic image. So let us be clear about what this is and what it is not. This is not a hurricane. There is no Category 5 approaching the eastern seaboard. This hurricane season has been historically quiet, and there is currently no scientific evidence that a major landfalling storm is imminent anywhere on the East Coast. Anyone selling you that over the next 10 days is selling you something. The pattern setting up is a normal, well-understood, thoroughly forecast summer pattern, an amplified jet stream, a moisture pump off the coast, and a series of short waves running through it. Forecasters saw it coming, they have published the risk areas, and the models are in reasonable agreement. This is meteorology working exactly as it should. But here's the real danger, the one I told you about at the very start, the one that is not on any of those 3 risk maps. The thing that will most likely kill someone in the eastern United States over the next 10 days is not a storm, it is a road. It is a familiar stretch of local road, at night, in the rain, with maybe a foot or two of moving water across it that looks shallow from behind a windshield because you have driven that road 1,000 times and you know exactly how deep the dip is. The majority of flash flood deaths in the United States happen in vehicles. 6 inches of moving water is enough to knock a grown adult down. 12 inches is enough to float most cars. 2 feet will carry away a pickup truck. And the water is almost never as shallow as it looks because the road underneath it may have already washed out. That is what saturated ground does. It does not make the sky more dangerous, it makes the ground more dangerous. The culvert, the low crossing, the underpass, the creek behind the house that has been a trickle for 11 months. Know which roads in your town flood first because your town has a list and everybody who has lived there 10 years knows it. Do not drive into standing water at any depth at any time for any reason. And if you are in the southeast under the heat instead, check on someone over 65 who lives alone today in person. 3 risk areas are drawn across the east tonight. The ground is already full, and the next 10 days are going to keep testing it. Tell me in the comments where you were the last time water came up somewhere it was not supposed to, and what you wish you had known beforehand. And if this was worth your time, hit that like button. We are going for 5,000 on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.